Hello, people. Whoever's listening to me on this fine day on planet Earth. This is Dr. Matthew W.I. Dunn, and I'm here to talk to you about Jesus. Ah, yes, my best friend, my Lord and Savior, my God, my King, Jesus of Nazareth. And before we talk about Jesus, I thought we might begin in prayer, and a special kind of prayer, sort of meditative type of prayer. If this is what you'd like to meditate to, I have a little video for you. And just sit back and enjoy for the next few minutes. There are two things you need to know about Mr. Dunn, other than the obvious stuff that, he loves Jesus and he loves his church. Two things. Mr. Dunn loves Indian food, and Mr. Dunn loves Christian heavy metal. And not necessarily in that order. And if I could eat Indian food while listening to Christian heavy metal, oh, that's paradise to Mr. Dunn. Anyways, I think that's an appropriate opening. Yes, Jesus, you are the King of Kings, and you want us to have a good time and to enjoy ourselves. That's why you made us. You made us to be happy. You didn't make us to be sad sacks and to be unhappy people. You made us to be happy with you. And you came even to be amongst us to make us happy. And so, yes, Jesus, you are the King of Kings. I acknowledge you as the Messiah of the Jews and the Son of God. And in your name, through the Holy Spirit, I give glory and praise to your Father forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Spirit. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hold on a second. I got to let the cat in. Come on, cat. She hates closed doors. Come on, cat. Yes. One of God's creatures. I love her. I love my cats. My kitty cats. Okay. Jesus' ministry and teaching. Okay, his ministry and teaching. There's a nice picture of our Lord Jesus. Not a photograph. I don't think so. I don't think this is an actual photograph of Jesus. Some artist's conception of Jesus. One might say a tradition, not a sacred tradition, but a customary way that Jesus is represented. You can see the beard and the brown hair. He's a brunette, longish hair. He looks very westernized in this rendition, but the guy who was painting him was a German, I believe. So there you go. And he's dressed, of course, all in white robes, like a toga, with sandals, etc., and so forth. If you looked at this, how would you know that this is Jesus of Nazareth? But the customs that we've learned tell us that this is he. There are certain things you look for. This is me right here. This bearded dude, yeah, rubbing his face up against Jesus. Oh, that's Mr. Dunn. That's me. Oh, my blessed Jesus. Okay, moving on. Jesus! Now, let me make sure I can fit this in. Let's see. 35. Let's see how that does it. Okay, that's pretty good. Jesus, excuse me. Here are some pictures of Jesus. Remember, I was just talking about this guy's portrait of Jesus in a picture. I'd have to look up. Well, first, I think it's Carl Bloch who did the picture. And I'd have to look up when he lived. Let me see here. First, let me right that it was this German artist named Karl Bloch or Bloch. Any day now, internet. Any day. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I said he was German. Well, he was German. He is Germanic. Was Germanic. He's Danish. Excuse me. Let's see here. He did a lot of paintings that I like of Jesus. I don't see the one I'm looking for though, so maybe I'm wrong that it was he. Anyways, but he does have a lot of nice paintings here of Jesus of Nazareth. Oh, these are the life of Jesus, so it might not be complete. Let's go to a website and see if. No, I don't want that. Okay, here we have an online gallery of his work. Oh, here's even better, a web page dedicated to him. Karl Bloch. Let's see if try to get as many pictures as possible of the page. There. Just keep scrolling until something looks familiar. Okay. I'm almost sure that I got the picture from him. There we go. Yeah. This is another version. So I think we're on the right track with this. Unless I've missed it, that the other version is here and I missed it. But anyways, okay. Well, I did a little search, paused the video and did a little search, and I was able to confirm that yes, there was a picture by Karl Bloch, and he died in 1890. Okay, so what is that? Definitely over 100 years ago, 120, 30 years ago. Mr. Dunn is not the mathematician, so please correct me. So he didn't know Jesus, but he's yet painting pictures of Jesus. And see, when Jesus did live, he died in 1890 A.D. Karl Bloch. And I also learned that the name of the painting is the Latin term consolator, the consoler. You know, Jesus, the consoler. Which makes sense, because everyone's kind of grappling and hanging on to Jesus, and they're all happy, and whatever. So he died. Cross usually indicates someone's death. Unless you're Jewish or Muslim or something else, then you don't like the cross, and you do something, write D for an abbreviation for died. But he died in 1890 A.D. Excuse me. A.D. All right. A.D. Now this is where we get to my discussion of A.D. and B.C. Because you'll notice, you might notice, if you look at the PowerPoint, that what are Jesus' dates? As roughly or as closely as we can determine, Jesus was born around circa 4 BC, and he died, or left the building, left planet Earth, let's put it that way, circa 33 AD. So let's think about that for a second. All right? Let's unpack that, as we academics like to say. Let me highlight this. Make it bold, then another color, and big, because it's important to talk about. Okay. Circa 4 BC is when Jesus was born, and he died, or certainly left existence on this planet, because we have no tomb of him. Well, that's not true. We do have his tomb in Jerusalem, but it's empty. We don't have his bones or his body. So Jesus left in 33 AD. I've told you before that, or I'll tell you now, that that's CA period is an abbreviation for the Latin term circa, which means around, near. Well, let's stick with around, okay? Because if you know the word circus, what is a circus? It's like a theater in the round, okay? You've got a circular, what you would call it, I want to say stage in a sense, and everyone sits around it, and within the circus is where the performers do their acts and parade around the circus and all sorts of stuff. If you are Spanish, then you already know this, because you would say acerca de cuatro antes del Cristo. You know, around cuatro años antes del Cristo, before the Christ. Okay, so circa, so we're saying around 4 years, 4 BC, which would be 4 years, year 4, let's say year 4, well, I'll say 4 years, and this BC, before Christ, before Christ. Let me highlight these 2 letters because they're important. Okay, so we have B period and C period. So this is an abbreviation from English, which means before Christ, before the coming of the Christ, which for the Western world, for Christians, we believe that it is Jesus of Nazareth, and therefore he is the Christ. The next part of the date, the end date, okay, is circa, you should know what circa means by now, 33 AD. So around, oops, how did that get messed up? Get lacking. I'm going to get this on there. You know, okay. Just put it on the next page. Okay. Would be around 33 years, okay, AD. Now, most people, I know I overuse the word now, but, you know, whatever. Sorry about that. Most people that I talk to and my students in class, whenever I ask about AD, never fails. There's always someone who says, and I think there are a lot of people who are thinking but don't say, that it means after death. So it's 33 years after death, okay, because you're talking about the death of Jesus, yes? Yes? No. I mean, think about the logic of that, okay? 33 years after death, AD. Just think about the logic of that. You mean 33 years after the death of Jesus? So when did Jesus die? When did Jesus die? Or when did he, when was he ascended into heaven then? If you believe the traditional dating that Jesus died when he was around 33, well, then what you're really saying is 66 AD. If you mean 33 years after his death, okay, you just add 33 onto 33, okay? So, I mean, the phrase doesn't even make any sense, after his death. It's not after his death. You could say it's at his death. Maybe people could say that. He was 33 years at his death. Okay? But still, no. This is a common mistake, and I understand exactly why people make it, because it's confusing, because in English we use it on the one hand before Christ, which is an English abbreviation, but then we switch to what is really a Latin abbreviation, AD, 33 years, Anno Domini. I'll put it in italics because they're foreign words in English. When you use a foreign word, something that's clearly foreign, that's not common in English, you would use italics to indicate that. Anno Domini, which is Latin. It's not English at all. And what does it mean? In the year of the Lord. Okay, it's a Latin expression. Anno Domini. A period, D period. Whoops. Okay? So it comes from Latin. How does it mean in the year of the Lord? Well, maybe some of you have studied Latin. I'm going to assume, and I'm not trying to be prejudiced here, stereotypical, but from some people's last names, some people, I'm going to assume from the, your ethnicity, the ethnicity of some of the last names, that some people are Hispanic. And you already speak Latin. If you speak Spanish, if you speak French, if you speak Italian, you are speaking Latin-based languages. And you can see the connection clearly in the words. Clearly in the words. For example, Year of the Lord. In Spanish, El Año. Doesn't work with the Lord, though. Señor. Whoops, Señor. El Año del Señor. Okay? Año, I mean, you can see it's almost exactly like anno in Latin. For why did the two N's become like a ny in Spanish? I don't know. That's just the way people pronounced it. And señor, well, that's a different word from dominus, which means a master. But whatever, just go with it. Spanish, it's also very close. El an du Seigneur. Okay, the year of the Lord. Okay. I don't know. I know Portuguese. I don't know if we have any Portuguese speakers in class. Portuguese, I think it's ano, I think. But you know what? I don't have to think. I should know. So let's go to Google Translate. Let's take a peek. The internet is there to help you people. It's to educate. To educate. Mess around with stuff. Educate yourself. Okay, Latin. Oh, right there, Portuguese. Anno Domini. Whoops, I misspelled it. Anno Domini. DC. Okay, so it's it's the abbreviation DC in Portuguese. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I guess in Portuguese they leave the expression alone. They say de anno Domini or anno Domini. All right. Well, I guess I'll have to do it in English. Actually, just the year of the Lord. Ano do Senhor. O ano do Senhor. Romanian comes closest. Romanian is also a Latin-based language, and I love Romanian. Romania was actually conquered late in the history of the Roman Empire, which is why it's just so fascinating. If you look at a map of the world, if you go to Google Maps here, I mean, even the name of the country, Romania, Roman, okay? It was conquered late in the history of the Roman Empire, and just one of those quirks of linguistic history, the language stuck. The language stuck. And the case system stuck of Latin, because those of you who might know something about Latin know that it has 5 cases. Let's see if I'm correct about that. The nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative. Yes, 5 cases. And Romanian has kept 4 of them? 3 of them? No, it has nominative and dative, and accusative and genitive. I think it has 2 of them. I know I said 4, but they're the same. They look the same. Accusative and genitive look the same. Okay. Here's the country of Romania. Okay. Entered late into the Roman Empire. It wasn't conquered or ruled for very long by the Romans, but they left their language and a lot of archaisms. It's close in some ways to Latin. So right here, notice annul domnului, Anul Domnului. Anul, they put the at the end. Okay, that's one thing that did not come from the Romans, but is a characteristic of a lot of languages in this area. For example, Bulgarian is a Slavic language like Polish or Russian or Ukrainian, and Bulgarian, they also put the at the end of a word. So they don't say the book, they say book the in their language. It's just something quirky about this area of the world. I think Hungarians do the same thing. Don't quote me on that, but I'm almost maybe 80% sure. But anywho, so year the of Lord the. Okay, and you see the case system. Anu is year, anul, and domnu, which means Lord or Master. Now notice the Romanians have kept the Latin word dominus, whereas in the Western Latin languages like Spanish and French and Portuguese and even Italian, it's switched to another word, senior, which means the elder one. You know, a senior citizen. Okay, but in good old Romania, they kept it close. They kept the word. And this is the genitive case. So this means of the Lord. Domnu, and then the Louis is the genitive case of the. All right. So Anno Domini. Anno. You can see from these endings, the O indicates that this means in the year. In the year. And Domini indicates of. Because the words are annus. If I just use the word, if I wanted to say the year or a year, annus, or if I wanted to say Lord, it's dominus, but these endings will change based on their relationship in the sentence, okay, how they're used. And we do the same thing in English. We just don't do it with our nouns. You already know this if you speak English. We do this in English, okay? I shouldn't say we don't do it with our nouns. We do it in one case with our nouns, and that's the possessive case. Okay? So, for example, I have the translation here of Anno Domini is in the year of the Lord. Or, it could be in the Lord's year. The Lord's year. They mean the same thing. What's the difference? Well, we have two constructions in English. In one construction, you can show the genitive or the possessive case, possession, by using the preposition of. You know, that is the book of me for my book. Or that is the book of John for John's book. Or you can use actually the possessive case in English, which we still have, where you add an S. Actually, it's an ES. It's Lordess, but the E is silent, and we put a comma there. Apostrophe, excuse me, not a comma. An apostrophe there. Apostrophe S. Apostrophe. And while we are at it, just for learning purposes, okay, if there was more than one Lord, let's say we're talking about 3 lords or 1,000 lords, okay, then it's different, okay. Well, let me give you another example. The boy's book, okay, one boy. But if it's plural, if you mean more than one, the boy's book. Okay, notice it's S apostrophe, if that indicates that it's plural. You can't tell from the pronunciation, boy's book, boy's book. You can't tell whether I'm talking about one boy or many. But you can tell when it's written out. At least you should be able to tell. That's as much as I'm going to say about that. Okay, so don't get confused about it. Certainly, if Mr. Dunn tests you on it, were to test you on it, this would be something he would definitely try to throw you a curveball on. So don't be confused. If you say after death, you're going to get it wrong. Has anyone noticed along the way something very curious about these dates. Something curious about these dates. Very curious. Well, maybe, maybe not, actually. Does it strike any of you as odd that Jesus was born 4 years before he was born? Circa 4 BC. Jesus is born before the Christ. Does that make any sense to you? Does that make any sense? Well, it should, or it will, okay? As with anything in the ancient world, we have to be approximate. And this is not a Christology course. If this was something, a course totally devoted to, Jesus and who he was and what he was and what he did and what he said, then I would go into much more depth. But it's not. This course is kind of a general discussion of Christianity, more general, I should say. But nevertheless, from certain historical keys, certain historical indicators in the story of Jesus, we have a relatively good idea of around the time when he was born, or was supposed to have been born, or people believed he was born. And that would be around 4 BC, okay? And we have indications of when Jesus might have died. But anyway, we're focusing here on birth. And you might say, well, so what happened? You know, how could it be 4 years before he was born? Well, you have to remember that this takes this takes me off into a little bit of history. And the calendar that we use today, that the Western calendar is based on, was developed by a man who lived, I believe, in the 6th century, which would be the 500s AD. I'll look this up in a second. The man's name was Denis the Short. He's also known as Denis Exiguus, which means the short. Tiny. I guess he was a short dude. Let me get his exact dates down. Go to Wikipedia here. Exiguus. Yes, Dionysius, which is an ancient form for Denis. Denis the Small, Denis the Short. They translate it here as Denis the Humble, whatever. Okay, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, no, I said 6th century. He was born in 470, but he died in 554. So I guess, he straddled both. Oh, that's interesting that the Romanians consider him a saint. Huh. I guess we Catholics don't consider him a saint, but the Romanians do. Huh, weird. Well, yeah, look at this. He was Romanian, so so they canonized him. Anywho, so yeah, he straddles the late 400s and the mid 500s. So circa 544 is when he died. So let's say 400s to 500s AD is when he lived. And one of his claims to fame is that he gave us our Western calendar through using historical documents that he had available to himself. He was able to extrapolate how many years it had been up until his time since the time of Christ's birth, the birth of Jesus. Because remember, people didn't have calendars. I mean, people had calendars, but people dated things differently. People would date things, for example, from the founding of the city of Rome, or from the founding of the Roman Republic, or the year of a king's reign. They might say, well, in the 4th year of the reign of King, Schlubby, whatever, and if you know that King Nimrod came before King Schlubby, and you know that Nimrod reigned for 20 years, and now you're saying it's in the 4th year of King Shlubi who comes after him. Well, then you know it's been 24 years. Okay, that's how people had to date and had to think. Okay, they didn't have a calendar to look at. So through looking at historical records, Dennis was able to figure out that it had been roughly like some almost 5 centuries since before him that Jesus had lived. If you want to read more about this, then I would say, you know, go on Wikipedia. They've got a really good description of how he came up with the calendar. But there are problems. I mean, Dennis didn't have the internet. You know, Dennis, you know, whatever. But the historical records that Dennis used were pretty good, but there were still gaps. And he also made some decisions about how he was going to date certain things or use certain things in his dating system that also affected the numbers, the sum of years that he came up with. So it's off by a few years, as you can see with Jesus. You know, in his calendar there was no year 0. Okay, so he's off, but you know, not bad for a guy living in the 500s A.D. Just, you know, using manuscripts and his own, you know, his own noggin, his own noodle to try and figure this out. And he was almost on the mark, but he was off by a few years. He was off by a few years. Okay, we've been using his calendar for what, 1,500 years now. Okay, it's doubtful that we're going to go back to 1,500 year or to history, all these historical events, and redate them. It's doubtful. Okay, so you have to deal with these little oddities that, for example, Jesus was born before he was born. Okay, it's just easier to explain it than to go back to every history book ever written and change all the dates, you know, or come up with something different. Because it works, you know, the calendar works. Okay, so that's the reason why. No big conspiracy, no, you know, whatever. Okay, he was a monk. So, surprise, surprise, you might tell this to some of your atheist friends, you know, that, you know, yeah, our calendar and dating system come from the Catholic Church. Dennis was in communion with Rome, even though he was in Romania, all the way out in Romania in the boonies. Well, they didn't consider it the boonies in Romania, but for Romans they did. He was in communion with the Pope of Rome for all that we know. Okay, he made up this calendar. He was a monk. He was a religious. But the calendar that we have today, you know, with its leap years and all of that, comes from Pope Gregory, I want to say the 17th, back in the 1600s. It might even be blessed now. I want to say 16th. Let me say 16th. See if I'm right here. Pope Gregory. No, that's a little bit too early. Was it the 15th? I mean, too early. That's a little too late. Okay, this looks good. From the 1600s. Yeah. Okay. He did not create the calendar, but he approved it, I believe. Created a commission of scientists. Let's see. Let's see here. I'm not sure it was he. I know it was Gregory. It was a Gregory. Maybe it was Gregory the 14th. 10-4. Let's see here. No, I mean, if I keep going, I'll eventually get to it, won't I? This makes me look really bad, doesn't it? Let's try Gregory the 12th. Which is kind of what I thought. Nope. Well, I found him. It's Pope Gregory the 13th. Pope Gregory the 13th, who I was wrong about the century, died in 1585. But anyways, he formed the commission of scientists to investigate the calendar because it was clear by the 1500s that the old calendar from Rome that had been in use from the Roman Empire, from Roman times, was off by a few weeks, at least several days. And so he asked some scientists to look into it, and they did, and came up with our calendar. And he issued the papal bull, which is a very official, one of the highest documents that a pope can issue on his own authority, instituting this calendar for the West. And that's what we use today in the West. Other countries, if you went to Saudi Arabia, if you went to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Muslim countries, they would not be dating their calendars this way. Okay, this is a Western way, and as you can see, our calendar is based on the life of Jesus of Nazareth, because we say we count down to Christ, before Christ, how many years before Christ, and then we count up, calling it the year of the Lord, when Jesus appeared, manifested himself. Other countries, they don't do that because they're not Christians. Okay, so if you go to a Muslim country, a largely Islamic country, they will not compute their calendar this way. They have a certain event in the life of Muhammad, whom they regard as a prophet, and from that event they date their calendars. So it's something like the 1300s still in Muslim countries, from the way they date it, or the 1400s, something like that. Still, like, I guess the high or late Middle Ages, if you want to put it that way. Anywho, you will sometimes see, actually you will often see, if you're taking other courses at colleges, or you read books, you will see them use these dates, or this abbreviation, BCE and CE. You say, well, where's AD? Where's BC? They don't use them. They use BCE and CE. Well, what does these expressions mean? They mean this: before the Common Era. And CE means the Common Era. Nothing else changes. Okay, when was Jesus born? Well, Jesus was born circa 4 BCE. When did Jesus die? When did he leave planet Earth? Well, circa 33 CE. Are you starting to see something here? Like, there's no difference between BC and AD. So what is this? And for some reason, this Common Era begins with the birth, or at least begins around the birth of Jesus of Nazareth and no other historical figure. Yes, there's a reason for this, my friends. It is an example of what we have come to call political correctness in academia. Basically, it's a way of dating in such a way that you don't have to kind of have it put in your face that you're actually dating from the birth and the death of Jesus of Nazareth from a religious figure. We don't want to offend people. Some people might not like the fact that they have to date their calendar from the events in the life of a religious figure 2,000 years ago. So we just wipe them out. We take away the before Christ, we take away the Anno Domini, and we come up with this completely fabricated system, and it is fabricated, called the Common Era. All I can tell you, my people, is if you contact an historian, find somebody at Harvard or Yale or your local community college or your local college university and shoot them an email. Well, don't literally shoot them an email, but we've had enough shootings on college campuses. But send them an email and ask that person, Dr. So-and-so, what is the common era? You know, I see this in my textbooks in biology. I even see them in history books. What is the common era? And they'll admit to you. I mean, I'm not making this up just for religious because it bothers me that they're trying to wipe out Jesus even from the dating system, which bothers me. But it's also a matter of truth and honesty. Okay? Come up with a different dating system. But don't create this thing called a common era, which nobody says exists. There is no such thing as a common era. And that's why I said, go to somebody who has a degree in history. Ask them. Historians love to divide up history into all sorts of sections and subsections of time. Ask them what the common era is. Ask them even more specifically, what is it about these dates, 4 and 33, that somehow initiates the common era? What happened then? Well, you know, Jesus of Nazareth was born. All right, so we snap back right to the original quote-unquote problem, if you consider it a problem, that you're dating the Western calendar from the birth and the life of a religious figure. Okay? So anyway, so you'll come across that. I will not use BC or BCE. I mean, if I have no problem, if a person does not want to say Anno Domini because Jesus is not their Lord and Master, and they don't want to make that kind of affirmation of faith, or say someone's a Jew and doesn't believe that Jesus is the Messiah, so you know he or she does not want to say 4 years before the Christ because they don't believe Jesus was the coming of the Messiah. Okay, you know, say circa 4 years before the birth of Jesus, and come up with some sort, Jesus of Nazareth, and come up with some sort of abbreviation for that. I don't care. That doesn't bother me. That's truthful. It is true. I would have no problem saying that. Anyways, so that's Mr. Dunn's rant for the day. At least on that topic. I'll rant on other things. These are all pictures of Jesus. Okay? By different people, we know not whom. Actually, in my notes here, why do I have that? That should be changed. Actually, I should change that on my PowerPoint. I say circa 4 BC. Okay, that should be fine. Probably should change that, though. Make it a little bit earlier. But whatever. Just leave it alone. Because what does circa mean? Circa means that it's around. We don't have the exact dates when Jesus was born. Okay, we only have them indirectly from historical references to other people who were famous people who were alive, that we know apparently were alive at the time that Jesus was born. Okay, so these dates fluctuate. I'm just looking at some other notes, and maybe 6 BC might be a better date. Maybe I'll change that in my PowerPoint. But I just don't want you to go crazy. 4 BC is fine. In fact, maybe I'll just cut this whole thing. Cut this out. Do some editing. Anyways, so these are all pictures of Jesus. This top one is of interest because it is the first instance, the first example that we have of the bearded Jesus, the one that we're all kind of familiar with, well, that we all are all familiar with, I think. This is in the Comedilla catacombs in Rome, late 4th century, so the 380s or the 390s AD. And what is a catacomb? Well, catacomb is essentially an underground tomb, basically. Well, they were used as tombs, but they're like underground tunnels in a way. Let's say underground tunnels. And oftentimes, especially in cities, city areas, there are also catacombs in, for example, Paris, old catacombs. They were used to bury the dead. As with any city, even ancient Rome had problems with population, and so you wanted to save as much space as you could. So you couldn't go up, and you couldn't go out, so they went down, and so they just dug tunnels, and they would bury their dead. Some of these catacombs were taken over by Christians, where Christians would bury their dead, and they would paint pictures on the walls. Some of these pictures are quite interesting, and they're quite early in a lot of cases. So, for example, as I just told you, this picture of Jesus dates from the 300s A.D. Okay, again, not a photograph of Jesus. It's a person's imagining of what Jesus might look like. He kind of looks like the philosopher, Roman or Greek philosopher. But there you go. It's our first instance of the bearded Jesus. These letters here are not Latin, they're Greek. It's not a W, that's an omega, alpha and omega, beginning the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. So they're symbolic of Jesus as the beginning and the end. If you want to see earlier pictures of Jesus, these are from a variety of catacombs, Christian catacombs and burial sites throughout under Rome. And these are earlier than this picture, the 200s AD, so the 3rd century. You see that Jesus looks like a young man, like a young Roman, really, a Roman man. Here he looks more like a philosopher with the long hair and beard. And here he's more like a young man. He's still dressed as a Roman, not a Jew, in a toga. You can see him down here and kind of in a toga. And his hair is short. His hair is short. And he looks rather like a young man. And these are various pictures from various parables of Jesus and also stories which had relevance for the dead. So you have, for example, here, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Here are 2 images of Jesus raising the dead. Here's another one of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Jesus, what is he doing here? Sowing seeds, maybe? Parable of sowing seeds. Jesus with the woman at the well in John's Gospel, where he talks about the water of life that will spring up in you. The woman with the hemorrhage, bleeding, who touches the tassel of Jesus' cloak to be healed. Okay, and some of these, the history of art can be fascinating. How people do things. Notice when Jesus works a miracle. Maybe you can't see it, but if we go up close, try to get as close as possible so you can see. You can also see, for example, how young Jesus looks. Notice clean shaven like a Roman would be. Okay, probably not as a Jew would be, because Jews, according to the law, were not supposed to cut the hair on their temples, on their foreheads. Now that's interesting. Whoops. That's kind of interesting. Here you can see where they would place the body. This would be the burial site. Jesus with his followers and raising the dead. That's interesting. I wonder what that is up there. I'd have to think about that. It looks like someone offering incense, a sacrifice in the background. I wonder what that is. Anywho, you see this, like Jesus. It looks like Jesus is holding a stick when he's doing a miracle. That's really not what it is. It's kind of like they're showing the power coming out of him towards the person that he's working the miracle at. Okay? Here again, Jesus sowing seeds. You can see, the power going out of him. Here's Jesus. It's another thing of Jesus. I'm trying to figure out what this is, because I don't know what this smudge thing here, but something's coming out of his hand. So he's doing some miracle. Okay, but anyways, think you get the point. It's just art history, how people showed things. Put that back. Let's see here. Whoops. Okay. Let's go to our one. So Jesus, okay, I talked Jesus of Nazareth. Of Nazareth is how he's usually referred to when we're talking about him as an historical figure. He was from the town of Nazareth, and I have a map here that shows Nazareth up here. It's in the northern part of Palestine. The northern part of Palestine, the town of Nazareth in the area of Galilee. You can see the borders of Galilee here. Okay, so in the north. So he's a northerner. Okay. The Gospels, there's a lot more I could say about the historical things about Jesus. But the Gospels are really concerned with telling us about his teaching and ministry, culminating in, coming to climax in, the story of his suffering, death, and resurrection. Okay? That's, in fact, those two things, Christ's death on the cross and his raising from the dead, are the two foci, or the one main focus, of all the Gospels. Not, his profession, his family background, his early childhood. Latin word focus, and the plural is foci, because it's from Latin. The focus, foci in Latin. So in English we say focus, foci. The passion, or I should say, we'll get to this. The passion, the suffering and death of Jesus, the cross and the resurrection, one might say. His suffering and death and his resurrection. These are the foci and the climax, the summit of the gospel story. Okay? And after that, we would place his ministry and his teaching. We have very little information about Jesus' youth, his early adulthood. Okay? If you read the gospel story, as I hope you have, I hope you've read the Gospel of Mark. I gave you the shortest of the Gospels, people, first. How does it start? It starts right with the John the Baptist in the desert. It doesn't even start with the story of Jesus per se. It starts with John the Baptist and his ministry of dunking people in water in the desert, out in the wasteland of Palestine somewhere. Don't really know. Okay, so Mark starts out that this is the beginning of the good news about Jesus Christ, but then he starts with, this prophecy from Isaiah the prophet and John the Baptist. And when does Jesus appear? Verse 9. Verse 9. It happened in those days that Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee. Well, that's interesting. Jesus just appears out of nowhere. It just happened that, sometime back then, Jesus showed up from Nazareth. Well, that doesn't tell us, who Jesus who? If you're not a Christian, Jesus who? Well, it kind of indicates for you that Mark was writing down stories that Christians would have known. He knows who his audience is. He doesn't need to explain who Jesus is or where Nazareth is. He says it's from Galilee, but, if you're not from Palestine, someone might say, whoa, where's Galilee, So Jesus just appears, It tells us, if you just had the Gospel of Mark, you'd know nothing about the prehistory of Jesus. But from other Gospels, we have some information. I've gone over stuff like this before. I went over this about his name in Christ. Going to go over that in another lecture, so I'll skip over this. But I just wanted to point out that from the Gospels we can know some things about him. For example, who his parents were, Joseph and Mary, where he was from. He was from Nazareth. He's called a carpenter. He's called a carpenter, so that tells us something about what profession he practiced. Skip over all of this. But if you read the four Gospels, no matter how differently in some ways they might tell the story of Jesus, the story follows the exact same pattern. It starts out with the baptism ministry of St. John the Baptist, the dunker, as John P. Meyer calls him. And the word baptizo really does, means to immerse, to plunge. It's a Greek word. Baptizo. Again, a long O. Not a short O. Baptizo, not baptizo, which means to immerse, dunk, plunge in water. And it'd be nice if I actually finally turned off caps lock. Yeah, there we go. To baptize, okay, to immerse or dunk or plunge in water. So John the Baptist, it opens with that. Then the gospel story proceeds to tell the ministry of Jesus, things he did, his teaching, his healing, his casting out demons, exorcising, and perhaps baptizing. Perhaps he had his own baptism ministry as well. But after all of that, it's all leading up to this, what's called the Passion narrative. The Passion narrative, which is just a name that scholars give to the block of material in each gospel, which describes the story of Jesus' arrest, his trial, his suffering, and then his crucifixion and death on the cross. And then the last bit we have is the resurrection, or I should say resurrection stories, the Passion narrative, and then we have the resurrection stories. Why are they called stories and not a narrative? I guess you could also say the resurrection narrative, but I think that is meant to highlight what scholars believe, that the Passion narrative there seems to be a unity to the Passion narrative. Okay, the stories of the suffering of Jesus, there seems to be a unity, whereas with the resurrection stories, John seems to have his own, Luke has his own, Mark has his own. So there seemed to be more diversity with the stories of the risen Christ. Why, I don't know. But it's all leading up to this event, the resurrection. This is what it's all leading up to. Okay? That the tomb is empty. Jesus dies on the cross, but the tomb is empty, and Jesus is said to be appearing to people. People claim to have seen him after his death. That's important. He has really died and been buried. This is not a recovery, a recuperation. Jesus spent a few days in a nice, cool, humid tomb and he got better. No, that's not what people were claiming. They were claiming that the Jesus who, in the case of some of them, they saw die on the cross, was now walking around and conversing with them. It wasn't the same Jesus. Some things were different about how he acted, or I shouldn't say how he acted, but how his body physically acted. For example, he could apparently appear and disappear at will. But there were differences, but it was the same Jesus that they knew and they loved and had followed. So the resurrection, the rising up. The word resurrection comes from a Latin word resurrexo. Whoops. Okay. Re plus surrexo. Or is it surrecto? I have to look that one up. Okay. Surgo, long O. Surgo, surgere. Okay. So surgo means to raise up or lift up. Okay. And of course, as in English, the re, the prefix re, means again. Okay. So to raise up again, lift up again, lift up again, you know, from someone who had been down. And, you know, when you're dead, you're down, you know. So, resurgo, from which we get our word resurrection, the lifting up, the raising up of Jesus. Jesus' ministry is characterized by words and deeds, words and actions. Jesus says things and he does things. He teaches and he works miracles. He casts out demons. He basically, and in a way prophetically, much like the Old Testament prophets, puts his words into action. Okay? If you read the Hebrew scriptures and the stories of the prophets, there's a great connection always made between, or I shouldn't say there's a great connection always made, but there is oftentimes a connection made between the prophecy and action. You know, the words of the prophet and how he acts out even those prophecies in the midst of the Jews. So to give you an example, the prophet Jeremiah was celibate, as John P. Myers says in the lecture. He gives a lecture, the Burke Lecture at the University of California, on Jesus the Jew. And at the end of his lecture, someone asked about, you know, was Jesus married? And he talks about how the prophet Jeremiah was celibate. He was unmarried, which was very unusual for a Jewish man to be unmarried. But why was he unmarried? Jeremiah was unmarried. He took no wife and had no family, to show God's judgment on Israel, to show that God was so displeased that the memory of Israel will be wiped out. Israel would be destroyed. And it was. The Babylonians, a group of people from ancient Iraq, invaded from the east and destroyed the kingdom of Judah and destroyed the temple, and that was all she wrote for a long time, for the people of Israel, because God was so displeased with their unfaithfulness. So to show that prophecy, you know, all you have to do is read the book of Jeremiah for his prophecies. He's very clear about this, but how angry God is. But he acts out that displeasure. He acts out that prophecy, his prophecy of judgment, by cutting himself off, by having no ancestors, no descendants after him. He doesn't marry or have children. So his words are acted out in his deeds. And Jesus is the same way. Okay? And his words are ultimately acted out on the cross and in his resurrection. Okay? On the cross, because Jesus is willing, as the saying goes, to put his money where his mouth is. He's willing to, he's willing to talk the talk and walk the walk. He's willing to even die for what he says people need to do and what he says he is. He's willing to die for that. He doesn't back down from it. He allows himself to be mistreated to the point of losing his life for what he says. The resurrection comes as a confirmation of his words, of who he says he was, of what he said people needed to do. So there's kind of a circular relationship between the cross and the resurrection. The cross as an example of Jesus' obedience to his mission from his Father, and the resurrection as kind of God placing a stamp of approval on that obedience and confirming kind of retroactively that, yes, all he said and did, my Son said and did, I stand behind that. I now glorify him and make it so. So, I mean, this is not religious at all. I mean, any historical figure says things and does things. Okay, so I mean, there's nothing necessarily unique about Jesus of Nazareth in this fact. Okay, but I just want you to know this. I mean, it's a basic insight. So basic, I didn't come up with it. But I've tried to kind of theologize about it a little bit for you, and why, in the case of Jesus, his words and deeds are maybe more important than another historical figure's words and deeds. Well, I'm just flipping through my notes here as I come to the other section that I want. Okay, his teaching. So this is what I'm going to focus on first. His words and then his deeds. There you go. The main figure, I guess figure of speech or metaphor that Jesus uses to define his ministry is this idea of the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God. This is the image Jesus uses quite frequently. It appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It doesn't appear very much in John's Gospel. Only in one place does the kingdom of God make an appearance. But if you read the other letters of Paul and other stuff in the New Testament, kingdom of God is also mentioned. So, you know, it is a theme that carries on from Jesus into the church. The kingdom of God. Okay, the Greek word that is used in the Gospels, since they were written in Greek, is basileia. 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 Kingdom is really not the best translation of basileia, and that's why I put it last. Okay, the reason that kingdom was probably used is because when the Greek scriptures were translated into English, like the King James version of the Bible and whatnot, well, who spoke English and what was England? England was a monarchy. It had a king. It had a ruler, and so this was something that people could relate to. I don't think people can relate so much to it today, even in countries that are still technically monarchies, but especially so in a place like the United States, where we at one time were ruled by a king, the King of England, in our early history as colonies. But we are a republic. We're not a monarchy at all. So we don't really have that experience of having a king, although some people might say that, the President of the United States, be it President Obama or any president, well, President Obama kind of allows you to date when I'm giving this lecture, but the President of the United States has more power than King George III could have ever hoped to have, the guy against whom we rebelled in the American Revolution. Nevertheless, if you go up north of the border into Canada, Canada is not a republic. Canada is not like the United States in government. Canada actually is a monarchy. It has a parliament, a parliamentary system, and the head of state is not the prime minister. The prime minister is the head of the government that is in power, but the head of state for Canada is still the monarch of England. So at this point in time, it's Queen Elizabeth II. When she dies, presuming that her son, who's next in line, will become king, he'll be King Charles III, I think, either the third or the fourth. I'm trying to think. There was a Charles. I know there was a Charles I. Charles, I think it would be King Charles III. He would then be King of Canada. She now is Queen of Canada, called Queen of Canada. And other countries as well, like, the Bahamas, other countries, places that used to be part of the old British Empire, still recognize, even though they're really independent countries, they still have the monarch of England as their head of state. She doesn't do much, just like in England. I mean, or the United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth doesn't really have much involvement in the government. Even less so after they passed a few laws in the last few years. But even less involvement in Canada, which is far away. The most involvement that she has is appointing her representative, called the Governor General, who lives up in Ottawa, kind of like the ambassador for the Queen in a way. Who also doesn't do much except make appearances, cut ribbons on behalf of the Queen, assign honors. So for today, even in countries that are technically kingdoms or monarchies, this word I don't think resonates really well. It doesn't express the full weight of what the word basileia means in Greek. Okay, for the ancient Greek, the idea of rulership, reign, express better the idea of basileia than kingdom. The rulership of God, the dominion of God, the reign of God. Back in the 70s, in the first New American Bible translation of the not the Old Testament, in the New American Bible translation of the New Testament back in the 70s, which generally was not really a very good translation. It was very loose and dynamic and not especially a good translation. But one thing that I think they did get right is they translated He Basileia tou Theou, the kingdom of God, as the reign of God. And, I don't know, some people didn't like that because they thought, well, they're changing traditional terminology and, it sounds very liberal, and other people were like, well, what does it mean, the reign of God? Well, I think, and I was kind of one of those. I was a teenager back then, and so I was like, all full of my own opinions. But the more, I studied and learned what the Greek language means by the word, I prefer rulership, but some people might think that rulership sounds a little odd. People might think that sounds a little odd. But I'll reign is okay. I'll still use kingdom because it's traditional. But you need to know what this means. Because even at the time of Jesus, the Jews had no kingdom. They had no ruler. They were an occupied people. And the Romans who occupied them, the Romans didn't have kings. They had an emperor. They had other forms of leadership. They didn't have kings. That was not a tradition, a strong tradition in Roman politics to have a rex, a king. So, a basileia, God is the ruler. Okay, this is the time Jesus is announcing the rulership of God. This is God's time now. You see this, the very first words of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. And in fact, if Mark was written first of the Gospels, the very first words of Jesus at all, in all the Gospels, what does Jesus say? After John had been arrested, Jesus came to Galilee, proclaiming the gospel of God. This is the time of fulfillment. The kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. In these two verses, there's just so much going on here. I mean, for those of you who might find the Bible boring, the scriptures boring, I don't know how you can, because just in two verses, there is just so much going on. It astounds the mind just as literature, just as simple literature. The genius of the scriptures, that in a couple of lines you've got, I could talk about this for another hour. I'm not going to, but after John had been arrested, well, there's an interesting point. When was John arrested? This is verse 14 of the first chapter. Read the first 13 verses. Tell me when John has been arrested. Nowhere. Okay, so it gives us, it's a seam, kind of like a seam on your clothing. It's kind of like a seam on your clothing where you can see where stories have been kind of stitched together. See, Mark knows the story already. And every now and then, he lets details slip out beforehand. He kind of like tells you the punchline before the punchline. And he doesn't mean to, but it just comes out, probably because he knows the story so well. And the people who are listening know the story so that they get the reference without him even explaining it. So he wants to situate this event in the life of Jesus according to another event that they know about, which is the fact that John had been arrested. Okay, in some time in his ministry, at some point, John the Baptist had been arrested, and so Mark is telling you that after John had been arrested, this is when Jesus did this. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. And the fact that they know the whole story about what happened to John, which Mark doesn't tell us until later, Mark doesn't need to explain it to them now. They know what happened to John the Baptist. So Jesus comes back to Galilee. So he returns to his native place, or at least to his region. He doesn't come back to Nazareth, interestingly. He comes back to Galilee, the north. Kind of wonder why Jesus didn't stay in the area where he already was. Why did he choose to go back to Galilee? Or why didn't he go straight to Judah, or Jerusalem, to the temple? Proclaiming the gospel of God. This word gospel, which you should know by now, means good news. It's a Greek word, which means the good message, good news. Jesus proclaims the gospel. So it's interesting that in the first chapter, within the first 15 verses, we have this word gospel mentioned 3 times by Mark. For Mark, it's the good news about Jesus. In verse 14, for Jesus, it's the good news about God that he's calling people to come to. And in the third use, you might even say it's the good news or the good message about the kingdom, the arrival of God's rulership. What about God? That he is now here. He has come to claim authority over his people. He's come to save them, in a way. So Jesus proclaims the good news of God. This is the time of fulfillment. Very prophetic, Now things are coming to a head, basically. Things are being fulfilled. Things are being brought together and tied up in a nice package with a bow. You could, if you wanted to maybe put it into other types of language. Okay? Things are being brought to completion. So right there, and that simple statement tells you something about how Jesus kind of thinks of himself. Whether or not you believe he's the Son of God, whether Jesus was proclaiming God or proclaiming himself, the fact that with the arrival of Jesus, with the beginning of his ministry, not John's, not anybody else's, but Jesus sees the beginning of his ministry as also the beginning of the kind of wrapping up of the story. The climax and beginning of the end of the story. All right? The time where things are being brought to completion. God is doing this through him bringing the good news. With him, the rulership of God is at hand. The authority of God is now being placed over his creation. With Jesus, repent and believe. This word repent comes from a Greek word, metanoia. I wonder if I put that on the PowerPoint. Did I put that on the PowerPoint? I hope so. There we go. This Greek word metanoia, literally it means to change your mind. Okay? Nous means mind in Greek, so to change one's mind. In modern English, you would say to change your heart. Okay, we're more about the heart than the mind, as the Greeks were. But yeah, conversion, so that's the definition, a change of mind or heart. Metanoia. Metanoia, that's an important word. Okay? Because Jesus, that's in the word repent means the same thing as conversion. So you could have translated this as convert and believe in the gospel. Change your hearts and believe in the gospel would be a more literal translation of this word repent. Or do penance is another way. But each of those translations has a little bit, do penance kind of sounds like going to confession. And, change your mind sounds more like, I don't know, Dr. Phil, even though that's really what it means in Greek. Okay? But, Jesus is making a call for conversion. He does not want people to think or act the way they've been thinking or acting before. So that's another interesting point about his message, that brief statement, that the rule of God is here. Now you need to change. It's not like the rule of God is here, everything's okay. Everybody's okay. Everything you've been doing is okay. Thinking is okay. Living is okay. No. Okay, it's not okay. Which is that's the inference. There needs to be a change of heart and mind in the people of Israel. Now that God's rule is here. God has not come in his kingdom to leave things the same. That's not the point. So when Jesus connects, if you read the Gospels, the Gospel of Mark, and also the sections from the Gospel of Matthew that I usually assign, probably have assigned, you might want to notice how often Jesus connects these two ideas of the rule of God and conversion, metanoia. Okay? From conversion, part of conversion is believing in the good news. The good news that God's rule is here. God has arrived in Jesus. Okay? Jesus is the agent of the kingdom. He's bringing it about. How is he bringing it about? Well, we're going to see in a moment. Okay? But I cannot insist enough on the fact that this call of metanoia, how it pervades the teaching of Jesus. Okay? Jesus is a forgiver. Jesus offers forgiveness. There's no question about that. And that's one of those things about Jesus that people seem to always remember. That Jesus forgives people. He shows them love and mercy. All right? But that forgiveness that Jesus gives to people, offers to people, is always tied to conversion. You shouldn't be different after Jesus, or you should not be the same, rather, after Jesus forgives you. So a number of times you'll hear Jesus offer forgiveness to a sinner, and he'll end it with, something like, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. sin no more. There's always always seems to be that that admonition, that advice from Jesus. Basically, don't get into the same type of trouble. You've been forgiven. You've been given a gift. Don't waste it. Don't screw around with it. Sin no more. Conversion means changing your mind. You're being drawn to a different way of life. And that different way of life might not fit in with the way you've been living. So what does conversion look like? Okay, well, in his teaching, Jesus, describes how it should look. He tells people stories. Okay? But he also acts out the stories in his ministry. Okay? What is the message of the kingdom that Jesus brings? The message is God. Almighty God, the God of the universe, exists in a special relationship with the Jews. He chose Abraham, their ancestor, and said, I will be your God. I will take you to a place that you do not know and give you that place, that land, for you to live on and to raise up descendants. I will bless you and I will bless your descendants. I will be your God. You will follow me alone. We call these people the people of Israel. Israel is the name. You might know or might not know, Israel is actually the name of a man. It is the name of one of the grandchildren of this man, Abraham. Okay, you have Abraham. Just to give you a quick synopsis. You have Abram, or Abraham, as he's also known, who had a son called Isaac. Actually, a number of sons, but Isaac is the one we're concerned with. And Isaac had a son named Jacob, who was also known as Israel. And hence, we get the term Israelites, those who are descendants of Jacob, Israel. God stands in or I should say the people of Israel, sons and daughters of Israel, stand in a special relationship with the God of the universe. I'm Irish. Why didn't God do that for the Irish? I don't know. Why didn't God just do that for all human beings, regardless of group, ethnicity, race, whatever? I don't know. I do know that God is God, and God's going to do whatever the heck God wants to do. And what do I say? Baruch ha'Adonai Eloheinu Melech Yisrael. That's what I say, baby. That's what I say. God, who is faithful to his covenant with the sons and daughters of Jacob, Israel, is now asserting his rightful claim over creation. All creation, but especially his people. Okay? Why? I don't know. I don't know what was so special about that period of time in human history on our planet that God was like, now's the time, baby. It's either now or never. I don't know. You'll have to ask him when you get to heaven. I probably won't, because that's not one of those things that I'm especially curious about. I'm curious about a lot of other things. Like, are there Klingons? Because I'd like to find me a Klingon wife. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Anyways, God has decided to assert his rightful claim, rightful because he's God. He made it. He made us. So he has rights that we don't have over creation. God can do whatever God wants to do because he's God. But God is not a king or a ruler to be feared. That's not the message Jesus brings. He's not a ruler to be feared. He's not a king who's ruling from far away. like somewhere over there in the stars, up there in the stars. Rather, the message of the kingdom that Jesus brings is that God is a loving Father. He's a loving Father who rejoices at bringing back his lost children. He doesn't chagrin them. He doesn't shame you. He rejoices that a son or daughter who has left him decides to return. That's the response of God. God is loving and merciful. And so that is numero uno in the message of the kingdom. And so it's not surprising that's one of the things Jesus is known for, being loving and merciful towards sinners. He acted out that message of his Father's love. He acted it out in ways that would have been surprising to people, shocking to people. I mean, think about it. Who Jesus hung out with, associated with, what people who were considered to be outcasts, the untouchables. People, sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors, and those who collected taxes for the Romans. These were people who were considered, traitors. They were collaborators with the oppressors. Jesus associated with the diseased and disabled. We know he had a friend named Simon the leper. There's the story of a man with a crippled hand, a withered hand that Jesus heals. A crippled woman, Jesus heals. Jesus associated and hung out with the unclean. I mentioned that picture of the woman who had a hemorrhage. She had a flow of blood in her vaginal area that would not heal, and it made her ritually unclean. Other people who were unclean would be Gentiles because they ate the wrong foods and they sacrificed to idols, to false gods. So they would have been considered unclean people to hang out with. The dead. Jesus raises people from the dead, but he touches their bodies. To have a dead body in a room or somewhere, that dead body made everything unclean, the whole area unclean. Such that a Jewish priest who had to be clean to minister in the temple, had to be ritually clean, could not touch a dead body, could not even be in the same room with a dead body, because of the fact that it would make him unclean. Not physically unclean. I'm talking about cleanliness. I don't mean physical uncleanness, like germs. I mean just presence. There are certain things that are unacceptable to God. Death being one of them. God did not create death. Or disease and illness. These are unacceptable to God. And so to be even in their presence is unclean, is unsacred, one might say. What made these things worse was not just that Jesus hung out with these people. He ate with them. He ate with them. Jesus would go to parties where there were women who were prostitutes. There were men who were tax collectors. Simon the leper that I mentioned before. The only time that Simon the leper is mentioned is in the context of where Jesus is having dinner with him. He's eating a meal with Simon at Simon the leper's house. We don't understand, perhaps today, how in the Middle East, especially 2,000 years ago, how extremely important who you ate with was. Okay? Today, we go to the cafeteria, or you go to the cafeteria on a university campus, or you go to a McDonald's, or a Starbucks or wherever, and you get yourself a coffee and a poppy seed muffin, or, you get yourself a burger or a slice of pizza, and there are all sorts of people in the building. There might be businessmen, there might be homeless people, there might be middle class people, there might be prostitutes, there might be people who are drug dealers, there might be people who are pornographers or pedophiles, there might be cops, firemen, doctors and lawyers, there might, whatever. And then there's you, you know. And you don't really think about, geez, I don't want to be in the presence of these people here at McDonald's. I don't want to eat food with these people. That doesn't even cross your mind, maybe. But it did back then. Who you ate with was a big deal. Was a big deal. Because it showed your approval of that person. It showed that, that person was acceptable for you to be around. It wasn't just, hanging out together and, hey, what do I care that she's a prostitute, No, this redounded on you. This came back on you. You weren't a prostitute, but if you hung out with a prostitute, it was, it was almost like you were now approving of her sinful lifestyle. You don't have to agree with it. It's just how it was. And notice how often in the Gospels Jesus is eating with groups of people that he really, if he followed the cultural mores of the time, this is a word from Latin, mores, or mores, people will now pronounce it, but, whatever, they're wrong. Sorry. Mos, a long O, mos. The genitive is moris, and the plural is mores, or mores, as it's traditionally said in English, but people will say mores. What does it mean? In Latin, it means a custom, a norm, a tradition, custom, norm, habit, tradition, okay? The norm of the culture was you don't eat with these people. And this was backed up by even the religious practice. I mean, all you have to do is read the Old Testament, okay? It approved of that view. You'll find this sometimes in the book of Psalms, where David will be like, do I share my bread with sinners? Do I hang out with bad people? No, I avoid their company. You're supposed to avoid them, not just not eat with them, but, if you saw them in the street, you were supposed to get away from them, avoid them. So you even had scriptural backup for that practice. How do we know this bothered people? Because people questioned Jesus on it. They challenged him. Well, not directly. They asked the disciples. They said, "Why does your teacher eat with sinners?" This was just not something. That's not because these were bad people or judgmental people, but when their culture told them, the scriptures told them, the rabbis told them, even just their gut told them, you don't hang out with these people because of what they do. One's a prostitute, one's a drug dealer, one's a murderer, one's a thief, and you're just hanging out with these people like, doesn't matter. Well, it did matter, but. So this idea of open commensality, which is just a fancy word of saying table fellowship. Okay, this was a major way of showing God's love and mercy. Okay, because it showed these people better than any words Jesus could have said. It showed them in action God's forgiveness. And as I said, it wasn't like Jesus was like approving of the people he was with. Well, in the case of the diseased and the handicapped, it's not like Jesus was like, it's your fault, you're a cripple. But people who, were sinners and whatnot and were in irregular situations, Jesus, this was an opportunity for healing, to offer and show them God's forgiveness so that they could change. Okay? Commensality. You know this word. Just break it down. Just break it down. Cum means with in Latin. Mensa means table. And you know these words if you speak Latin-based languages. Con, mesa. Well, in Latin it's not as good. But anyways, with Spanish, we'll leave it at Spanish. With, what would Italian be? Is it con mesa as well? I'm curious. I'm just curious. I love Google Translate. I just, play with it for hours. With the table. With the table. Cu tabelul in Romanian. Thank you very much. Con a mesa in Portuguese. What's it? I'm looking for Italian. La tavola. What's con il tavolo. Okay. But anyways, cum mensa, with or at table. So Jesus would be at table with these people that, some people might have said he should not have been with. Should not have been with. And the reason I give you from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 9, that's where Jesus is questioned. Or they say, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? I mean, that was an issue for people. Because it made him unclean. It made him unclean, ritually unclean, according to the Jewish religion. What did this mean for Jesus? It meant that, if you read the Gospels, Jesus placed, according to the Jewish law, and remember, the Jewish law was given through Moses by God. Okay, this was not people's opinion. I mean, some of it was people's opinion. But this idea of ritual cleanliness and things that would make you ritually unclean, like touching a dead body or blood, or associating with sinners, etc., and so forth, disease and disability. These, you can find them in the law of Moses and the Torah, in the scriptures. So, I mean, these came from God for people. And yet, Jesus, even according to the Jewish law, was putting himself in a constant state of ritual impurity by hanging out with these people. Even more so by eating with some of them. But by simply hanging out with them, touching them, letting them touch him, sometimes just being in their presence, he was in a constant state of ritual impurity. It kind of gives you an idea of why so many people, religious people, couldn't figure Jesus out. Because no good rabbi would do that. These weren't bad people who opposed Jesus. You don't want to, even the Gospels, they show that there is a butting of heads, and that there is definitely tension between some groups of people and Jesus. But the Gospels don't necessarily make them out to be evil people. That doesn't mean they weren't religious people and they weren't good people. But, you can kind of start to understand, if you want to get into the heads of the Pharisees or some of the other Jews who were around Jesus asking questions, why Jesus was so confusing. He's kind of like a rabbi, but he's doing things that no rabbi should do. How can he work miracles when he's constantly unclean and he doesn't cleanse himself? The next part of the picture. Jesus can work miracles. Ooh, that puzzles people. Here's a man who eats with sinners and yet can heal people, raise the dead, and work miracles, basically. Extraordinary or unusual events. Now, we have a problem with miracles in the modern world. Part of that problem, I would say a large part of it, is due to um, us religious folk. Us religious folk. Because people can develop a rather superstitious view of miracles. Like, you do certain rituals, you go to a certain place, and you kiss a stone 12 times in honor of the 12 apostles, each of the 12 apostles, and, if you're a cripple, then you'll be able to walk. Yeah. Or you go to a certain place, and you drink water from a well, and you'll be able to see if you were blind. Okay, those things I believe they happen, and those are miracles. I'm not questioning people's faith in them, but you want to be careful that it doesn't become superstitious, that we always remember that miracles come from God. They don't come from human means. And God works a miracle whenever God wants to, at His will. Okay? That doesn't mean God is capricious, or God's like, okay, what are you going to do for me? You have to do X, Y, and Z for me before I'll work this miracle. I'm just saying that we always need to remember the source of miracles. The reason that they are wonders is because you're wondering at the glory of God who works them. No miracle is worked specifically only through, say, a human being, a saint, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Okay? Miracles come from God, not from created things. That is superstition. That's magic. That's magic, which the church condemns as a sin. God's creation should not be used superstitiously. Okay? But there are miracles. Okay? Now, a lot of, it's like scientists, and you hear the new atheism you'll see it on television or on the internet, on YouTube, and these people who will say, oh, do you believe in miracles like virgin births and, talking snakes and, like God making the making the sun stand still for a day, blah, 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 blah. Okay? And they usually pull this kind of stuff on, say, evangelical Christians or conservative Christians. Take the Bible, I would say, superstitiously. They understand miracles superstitiously. I'm not saying those things didn't happen. Okay, if maybe one day we'll find out that snakes had vocal cords. Whether they could speak or not is a whole other thing. But anyways. A lot of animals have vocal cords, and they don't speak. They don't speak. They make sounds, they communicate, but they don't speak. Okay, they don't have the power, the faculty of speech that we humans do, to put together symbols that mean things, which is kind of like what language is, express what's in our mind. No, miracles, and they can't be natural. Scientists will be like, well, if you can explain a miracle, then it's not a miracle. Why? Why? A miracle, like anything else, is in the natural, happens in the natural world. If a person, for example, has cancer and the cancer disappears, okay, and I mean like overnight, or very quickly, for no apparent explanation, well, there it is, no apparent explanation. There might actually be an explanation. There might be, the simple explanation might be whatever was in the person's genetics that was causing certain cells to metastasize, get bigger and out of control, God either stopped or reversed. Because He knew how to do it, and He could do it, and He wanted to do it. We don't know how to do that. Maybe one day we'll figure it out, or figure out something. Okay? Does that mean it wasn't a miracle when it happened? No, because it was the action of God. God intervenes in an extraordinary, outside the ordinary, and unusual event. There's nothing about a miracle or the definition of a miracle that means that God cannot use the natural laws of his creation to work it. And that's where today a lot of people misunderstand miracles. And as I said, I think largely the blame is placed on us religious believers because we treat miracles so superstitiously. God can't be touched by creation. Somehow, if God uses physics or the natural laws of his creation, almost like that's like God's cheating or something, or whatever. Well, that's never been the definition of miracle that I've heard of. That's never been the definition that I've heard of. It's God's intervention in human affairs. And it's a real intervention. It doesn't mean, I'm not trying to symbolize everything like, the Sea of Reeds didn't really part in front of the Israelites. They walked on dry land. That's just, I don't know, that was just happenstance, and they ascribed it to God, No, I think God intervened on their behalf and worked a miracle for his people. He did something for them. Now, how they described it, that's a whole other thing. Like, for example, in the book of Joshua, when it describes that the sun stood still for a day, well, obviously, we know astronomically that that's not accurate. The sun does not, the sun does not move in the sky. The sun is stationary. It appears to move because our planet is moving around it. So that's what he saw. Now, in the normal order of things, if the Earth stopped moving for 24 hours, I'd have to ask an astronomer what would probably happen to our planet. Is that even possible? Or would it be like, some science fiction horror film where the planet rips apart, like the movie 2012 or something, which was awful. Woo! You want to see a bad movie? Oh, John Cusack, 2012. Oh, so I gotta tell you, folks, I really had to tough it through that stinker. And that definitely makes like my top 5 list of bad movies of all time. But anyways, I wasn't there. I don't know what God did do or could have done, but whatever God did, it appeared to Joshua or to the people who witnessed the event that the day had been lengthened, that the sun had stopped or slowed down or whatever, but that the day had been lengthened by God so that they could, execute judgment on their enemies in a battle. Well, that's all I'm going to say about that. So the word miracle comes from the Latin word mirari, to be wondered at. We wonder at the glory of God. Doesn't mean it's unexplainable. It just means that the only explanation that works is God. And it doesn't mean that like 100 years from now someone might discover something and say, yeah, that's why that person who was blind suddenly could see again. That's what probably happened, and they mistook it for a miracle of God. Ha ha ha, those dumb primates, No. No, God used something that we've now discovered how he did it. That's how I look at it. Okay, so miracles. Again, superstition. We don't want to look at the miracles of Jesus that he worked superstitiously. And the Gospels don't. The Gospels are very clear in the way they phrase or talk about the miracles of Jesus. They don't even call them miracles. This Latin word mirare, a wonder, to be wondered at. In the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they use the Greek word dunamis, which means from the English word dynamic. So we get our words dynamic, powerful. You say someone's dancing is dynamic, or he's a dynamic preacher. He's powerful. You know what these words mean, people. part of being an educator is not like me teaching you things you don't know. It's kind of like revealing stuff, pulling back the layers of stuff that you already know that maybe haven't made the connections. So dynamic, powerful. These were powers, in a way, is what they literally call them, but acts of power. You might say these were actions of power, powerful actions. Okay? There was something about what Jesus did that radiated power to people. Interesting. I wonder what they mean by that, but I wasn't there, so I don't know. But anyways, John, however, and this is a great question to ask on an exam to make sure you're listening still, John never calls them that, though. John prefers to call the miracles that Jesus works signs. The Greek word semeion. Semeion means a sign. Could also translate it as symbol. Okay? He prefers to call them signs. Jesus worked this sign at the well in Samaria, or whatever, you know? A sign. He didn't work a sign at the well in Samaria, but I'm just, riffing on you. Trying to give you an example. Jesus cures a blind man in the Gospel of John. Jesus heals a cripple in the Gospel of John. Jesus changes water into wine in the Gospel of John. Not one of these things is called an act of power. John prefers to call them signs. Why? Because in John's theology, and also in the theology and understanding of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's just that they don't spell it out as well as John does. They don't maybe see it as clearly as John does. The miracles that Jesus works must be understood in the context of his overall preaching about the kingdom. Okay? Remember, why is Jesus there? To preach the good news of God, that the rule of God is at hand. Okay? The old world was ending. This is the time of fulfillment. And now there was something new going on. God's rule was here in him. And so even the miracles cannot be disentangled from, disassociated from, abstracted from his preaching of the kingdom. These were signs not only that the rule of God had arrived, but they were interpretations of what it should look like. Sinners reconciled with God, people with diseases and disabilities healed, the dead raised to life again. These are all things that God intended none of them. These are not part of the will of God, that people should be divided from him. It is not God's will that people should live in suffering and misery. It is not God's will that we should die. And so Jesus is changing these things as he goes along, when he wants to. And when people have faith in him, we could talk about that for a while, because there are some times when Jesus cannot work miracles because the people he wants to help don't believe in him. So the miracles were signs of the kingdom's power and its presence, and they were actions of liberation, freeing people from the corruption and destruction of sin. Whatever happened in the Garden of Eden between God and Adam and Eve that kind of broke the relationship, that kind of cracked the vase, if you will, is now being not repaired in a way. God's repairing it. Sickness, death, demons, evil are all being wiped out in the face of Jesus. Jesus won't put up with it because it's not part of God's kingdom. Here we go. Exorcism. Exorcism. Now, I could show you exorcism, but I don't want to, from a movie, but a very famous movie, but it's got all sorts of blasphemous language and swear words in it, and it's also a horror film, so it might scare some people. Nevertheless, the church performs exorcisms. The church performs exorcisms. To this day, an example of Jesus is a picture from the Middle Ages of Jesus casting out a demon from somebody. But to this day, look at this. De exorcismis et supplicationibus quibusdam. I forget what quibusdam means, but on of exorcisms and prayers, supplication, prayers. You know what quibusdam means in Latin. In English, I should say, not Latin. I know what quibusdam means. It means quibusdam. Quibusdam. Some. Oh, okay. Some prayers. So on exorcisms and some prayers. Okay. Notice here the papal coat of arms, the keys with the papal tiara that we've seen before, that you might have seen on the heads of the popes at times. This is the actual cover of the book, put out a few years ago, actually in the 90s, and then it was revised. A revision was put out in 2000s of the Book of Exorcisms in Latin. I don't know that it's been translated into English yet, but it was a revision of the previous ritual for exorcism. It was kind of criticized by people. People thought the new Book of Exorcism wouldn't scare the devil, wouldn't scare anybody, let alone the devil, to leave somebody. And there are some legitimate criticisms of how it was revised. Nevertheless, through the ministry of the church, it's clear that you want the demon or the devil to leave the person, Nevertheless, you can still use the old form, which is kind of much cooler, it yells at the devil and calls him all sorts of nasty names. But anyways, exorcisms. I wonder what that means. I mean, I know what it means, but where it comes from in Latin. Exorchizo. I guess it comes from Greek. Usually, if it ends in an izo in Latin, idzo, it's of Greek origin. Notice the spelling, people, that it's exorcise. I mean, you might get some exercise trying to exorcise, especially if the person breaks loose and they start chasing you around the bed or something, trying to kill you. The power of Christ compels you. Then you might get some exercise, but that's not what the word means, and it's not how it's pronounced. Let's see, examples. Origin. From Greek. Exorchizo. To bind by oath. Oath. Okay, I can see where that comes from. To exhort as well. The Greek word exhort has that sense of... Okay, so you're binding to go out, I guess. Exhorke or exhorchizo. Well, that's fine. Whatever. So it has that sense of to bind, a binding the demon, and casting out, driving out. That's usually how it's described in the New Testament. When Jesus exorcises a demon, the Greek says he casts it out, he drives it away. So there's a real physical, almost a physical altercation in a way, even though it's a spiritual altercation. It's kind of like an oxymoron, a physical spiritual altercation between the Son of God and the son of Satan, or the sons of Satan and Satan himself. Because Jesus, I mean, that word drive away does not have, it's a very earthy word. Jesus literally drives the demon out. like whips him away. Get out of here. Gives him a kick in the butt on the way out. Okay? Like there is a real confrontation. The Son of God is in town. The rule of God is now here. And the devil fights against it. The devil, evil, fights against it. The church believes in the devil, people. I believe in the devil. Pope Francis, if you go and read his sermons at Mass every day and his talks to the crowds, I've read a number of, well, I've read some of his stuff, but I've read a lot of people who have read more than I have and have noted the fact that he mentions the devil quite frequently. We cannot forget, people. Jesus has conquered. Jesus, through his death on the cross and his resurrection, has conquered sin and death. The devil is nothing. The devil was never anything anyways. Okay? The devil was never nothing. Okay? God's always been God. But with Jesus, something is now different. The devil has been definitively conquered. It's over for him. It's been over for 2,000 years. Okay? So, but like with anything, it's kind of like when you have an illness, when you have a sickness, like the flu or something. Think about the progression. You start feeling sick, and then you are sick. And then you start trying to treat the sickness, maybe taking antibiotics or aspirin or something, and it seems to get worse. Or maybe you don't do anything at all. You just let your body handle it. Let the white blood cells go after the sickness. But it still seems to get worse. You go through maybe a day or so where you feel awful. And then it's almost like the tide is turning. You start feeling better, and it starts going away. And, maybe you have a stuffy nose rather than being congested and then, whatever. Okay? Why does this happen? Because if you know anything about our biology, which I'm not a scientist, but I watch TV and I watch shows. Anyone watch, like, it's on Animal Planet. They got, Monsters Inside Me. Ever see that show? It's about parasites and all sorts of stuff. Ooh, fascinating stuff. But you can learn a lot by watching it about how our bodies work. Our body, tries to attack the virus or attack the bacterium or whatever it is that's causing the illness. And, in some cases, the things they're strong and they fight back against the body. Because, of course, the bacterium wants to survive and to propagate itself. That's why you're sick. Okay? It only becomes a problem when the body cannot fight off the illness. And then you need to go see a doctor. Okay? And that's kind of like what's going on now. The devil has been conquered. His kingdom is over. His kingdom has been destroyed by Christ. But he's still rebelling. He's not going to go away without a fight. He's going to try and take as many people with him as he can. He's going to try to destroy as much of God's creation on the way out the door that he can. And that's part of Jesus' ministry. He's kicking the devil out, and the church continues that ministry of kicking the devil's butt out of people and places. That's why we have holy water. More Catholics should take holy water from their churches. Have a little holy water in your home. Throw some holy water around that's been blessed by a deacon, a priest, or a bishop. Throw it around. It's been blessed. Have an image of the cross in your home that's been blessed, or a picture of Jesus or the saints. Because the devil hates God's friends. He doesn't want to be around these things. He doesn't like them. He doesn't want to be around you if you're a Christian, because you have the Holy Spirit in your soul. And he'll try to destroy that. So the church continues this action of Jesus, casting out the devil. Okay? The miracles, the exorcisms, these were not just kindnesses that Jesus did to help people. This is another thing sometimes. It's really, I have to be, in my opinion, this is such a silly argument. But I've heard this be made by some atheists, who should really know better because they're quite intelligent people otherwise, who would say, well, if God can work miracles, what about a person who's lost his arm? Why doesn't Jesus, if Jesus were around, why didn't Jesus just give the guy a new arm out of thin air? He's God, isn't he? Or when Jesus came, he only healed a few people. Why didn't Jesus come and heal everybody on the planet? Remove sickness and death all over the place, everywhere. And somehow that's supposed to make me go, ooh, and lose my faith in Jesus, or in miracles. It's really, I think, a rather weak argument, because that's not the purpose of miracles. That's not the purpose of why Jesus cast out demons. These were not kindnesses or gifts. Jesus did these things to concretely manifest the presence of God's kingdom. That's why he did these things. These were not gimmicks. Hey, Jesus is in town. Let's see if he heals a few cripples. Hey, we got a possessed guy over here. Oh, he's violent too. Let's bring him to Jesus. That should be good. We can sell a few tickets. Jesus was, come on, this wasn't the WWE. This wasn't, Penn and Teller. Jesus was not like a magician, handing out his card and saying, hey, my kid's got a bar mitzvah, Jesus, Could you come work a few miracles? These were to show that God was triumphing over the forces of evil in his creation, which had no right to be there. The devil has no right over God's creation, over any person, Christian, non-Christian, good or bad. The devil has no claim over that person's spirit, soul, body. The devil did not make that person. At the very least, he's not the creator of that person. And the devil has no right over any human being to take possession of that person, to inhabit that person. God has that right. God should be present in our souls in a relationship of love. The devil only wants to destroy. The devil just wants to take up his own position, and 100%. The devil doesn't want to share anything. He wants to take up everything and consume. And once he's done consuming, throw you away. I mean, I hear some people say, I've heard, this is another silly thing I've heard some people say, and they say they're Satanists and stuff like that. You can find these people on the internet. And they were like, maybe some of you have heard this. There are people who will say, I would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. That's how they look at it. In heaven, you're like a slave, you're a servant. But in hell, you reign. It's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Okay. Well, do you really think that that's what's going to happen? I mean, I'm assuming they believe in hell and they believe in the devil. Do these people who say this really think the devil is going to allow them to, in any way, share power with him in hell? Really? That's not the devil I know, and that's not the devil they know either. They don't think the devil's, it's not like they're saying, oh yeah, the devil's a great guy. The devil's truthful. The devil's loving. The devil is about power, and power consumes. Power wants more power. That's what the devil's all about. Look at this from Luke chapter 11. The Gospel of Luke. Jesus was driving out a demon that was mute. Now, was the demon mute, meaning he couldn't speak, or was the guy mute? He had a demon. I don't know. And when the demon had gone out, the mute person spoke, and the crowds were amazed. Ta-da! Woo! But some people, however, were not so We're not so impressed by Jesus. Some of them said, by the power of Beelzebul, the prince of demons, he drives out demons. By the power of the devil. By the power of the devil, basically, is what they were saying. He drives out demons. And this made sense to them. Why? Because, as I told you before, if Jesus were an unclean man hanging out with sinners, with dead people, with the disabled, okay, he was ritually unclean. In the eyes of God, then, he wasn't really a good man because he wasn't following the law of God. So for an observant Jew, he could not be driving out demons by God's power because he was unclean. So it must be the devil. The devil is playing tricks on us. He's driving himself out, to impress us or something, or to confuse us. I don't know. So some people said that. Others, to test Jesus, to make sure, asked him for a sign from heaven. If you're a good guy, Jesus, if you are what you say you are and who you say you are, ask God to give a sign. Ask for his approval. Ask God to show that he approves of you. Because if God doesn't show it, are you from the devil? But he knew their thoughts and said to them, well, that makes sense because one of the weird things about the ancient world that we don't realize, but if you read about the ancient world, you kind of discover, people didn't have unexpressed thoughts. People, when they prayed and even when they read, almost always read out loud. Okay? So when you read the Gospels and it says, Jesus knew what was in their minds and stuff like that, a lot of times what people were thinking they would say. Okay? For example, this is a very famous example, Julius Caesar, the great leader of the Roman Empire at one time. Julius Caesar, who was assassinated, I forget when he was killed, in the BC. He was before Christ, I know that. Very famous. One of the things that was known about him, was remarked about him, was that when he would read, he would not move his lips. He would not speak out loud. Okay? When people read things, they usually read them out loud, or spoke out loud, or prayed out loud. Okay? Very different kind of mindset than what we're used to. Okay? Especially in libraries where they're always shushing people. You should tell them, hey, I'm being traditional. Back in the ancient world, people read out loud. But anyways, so he knew their thoughts and said to them, every kingdom, every rule or reign that is divided against itself will be laid waste, and house will fall against house. So he's just pointing out to them the stupidity of this. If Satan's divided against himself, well, then you should be basically rejoiced, because how will his rule stand? For you're saying that it's by Beelzebul that I drive out demons. So if Satan is removing himself from the picture, well, then he's in chaos and he's over. He's done with. If I drive out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your own sons drive them out? Now, I don't like the translation here. They don't, literally it says, by whom do your sons drive them out? And they translate it here, people, which is not correct. But they want to be gender inclusive, and, they want to include everybody and not make it so male-centered. The problem is that what does Jesus mean here? Because in the background always, well, I shouldn't say in the background always, but in the background you might have here a reference to the Son of God. Jesus, who is the Son of God, is casting out demons. That's how he can cast out demons, because he is of God. He's God's Son. And if you're saying that I, God's Son, am casting out demons by the power of the devil, blasphemous, well, then how are your sons casting them out? Meaning your followers. Therefore, they will be your judges for your blasphemy. So you lose that reference to the Son of God by that translation, and that's really, in my opinion, a mistake. That's ideology trumping or overriding good and proper translation, in my opinion. But if it is by the finger of God that I drive out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. You find this only in this statement, this version of this statement in Luke's gospel. It's also in Matthew's gospel, but in a different form. But this is a very odd way of saying what Jesus is saying. You know, if it's by the finger of God that I'm driving out the demons, okay, this is a clear, for any Jew, this is a clear reference to Moses, okay, or at least the power of God, because there are a couple of stories in the Old Testament. The first one is Moses. When Moses goes to Pharaoh, this is back in the book of Exodus. Okay, Moses goes to Pharaoh, who is the ruler of the Egyptians and is oppressing the Israelites, God's people. And so God sends Moses to Pharaoh to say, basically, let my people go. I want my people back. They're not yours, they're mine, and I want them back. And Pharaoh is like, you know, basically says to Moses, get back to work. You know, as any boss would. You know, if your employee came in and said, you know, God tells me I need a sick day today, you know, shut up and get back to work, Bob. You know, so Pharaoh's like, who are you? You know, go back to work. So, you know, Moses leaves and God's like, you know, no, go back to Pharaoh and tell him I want my people. And of course, Pharaoh is not impressed that the slave's God, now is that apostrophe S or S apostrophe? The slaves, more than one, isn't it? The slave's God is telling Pharaoh what to do. He's not impressed by that. So God sends Moses and his brother Aaron to Pharaoh and, you know, tells Moses, you know, I'm going to work miracles through Aaron. So tell Aaron to do certain things, and has him, you know, and Moses to do certain things. So, for example, Moses turns water into blood, undrinkable water, makes the water undrinkable. Moses has Aaron, his brother, throw his staff down on the ground, and it turns into a snake, etc., and so forth. Now, if you read the story, Pharaoh's magicians were able to reproduce these miracles. Let me repeat that. Pharaoh's court magicians, the people that he used to consult his own gods, were able to reproduce some of the things that Moses and Aaron were doing. They were able to change water into blood. They were able to also change their staffs into snakes. And so they were not that impressed by the God of Moses. You know, they just weren't that. They were like, well, okay, you know, big whoop, we can do this. I'm just trying to see. I want to see which is the final miracle that. Okay. Anyways, and so there's this progression of the plagues, but it gets to one plague. And I had to look up in my Bible. It's Exodus chapter 8, if you're curious. The book of Exodus chapter 8. It's called the plague of gnats or flies. However, apparently from reading the footnotes, the Hebrew word is an uncommon word, and it's not totally clear what this plague consisted of, what these things were, but we'll say gnats, little bugs, little buggies. Anyways, Egypt becomes infested with these creatures, and finally the magicians of Pharaoh try but cannot replicate the miracle. They're finally beaten. They go to Pharaoh and essentially say, we can't do this. We've tried to replicate what Moses and Aaron have done to us. We can't do it. And in fact, the word they use, what they say to Pharaoh is, "This is the finger of God." This is verse 15. Which was their way of saying that this is beyond our powers. This is something that, Moses has tapped into, something that we can't tap into. This is the finger of God. Okay? So this is probably the reference Jesus is making. Okay? Which is interesting because he says, if it's by the finger of God that I'm doing these things. So the reference to himself also kind of infers, or not infers, but implies a Mosaic lineage for Jesus. That Jesus is not just a prophet, but he's like Moses, in the sense that, the miracles that Moses was able to work by the finger of God, Jesus is also like Moses working miracles. Okay? So that seems to be this reference. If it's by God's finger, his power, that I'm doing it, then the rule of God has come upon you. Wow. He blows everybody away. If it's the finger of God. Okay? So, given the story, Pharaoh hardens his heart. He sees all these miracles being worked by Moses, but his magicians can work them too. When it comes to a point where Moses can do things that now even through the power of the gods of Egypt, the magicians can't do, and they have to acknowledge that Moses' God is more powerful, Pharaoh still will not believe. He will not listen to the God of the slaves. So there's also kind of a blame being placed on the people here that they are hardening their heart against Jesus, who is also doing things through the finger of God. And they will not even acknowledge that. In fact, they do the opposite. They say it's through the power of evil that he's doing it. That's how hardened their hearts have become. Some people have become in the crowd. Okay. So Jesus is driving out demons to the finger of God. He is overcoming the forces of evil. Okay, the Last Supper. I don't think I'm gonna go into this because I've been going on. Actually, no, I do want to go into it, don't I? But we're getting on to, I've been speaking for 2.5 hours, so I think what I'll do is I will stop here and continue on later. So, may the mercies of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, be with you. Amen.